Games Workshop released a great little video painting the new Maggotkin Rotswords, and they're showing a few of my favorite painting techniques. But for a few reasons, the result doesn't quite look like the box arts. And it kinda reminded me of the fact that also what used to be recommended on the back of the boxes has nothing to do with the actual front of the boxes. So I wanted to make a video that not only shows how to get closer to these results with a few changes to the approach and make your results look a bit more impressive, but also what we can learn from these discrepancies between the different results Games Workshop presents us on different media. And look, I understand, you could argue that this is aimed at beginners, but I'm here to tell you that even as a beginner, you can implement a few ideas that will instantly push your efforts and results further, without having to invest more time or learning anything complicated. So we already know that Games Workshop doesn't really give you the correct colors on the back of these packs. And right off the bat, the base color they used in the video, I'd say isn't the base color they actually used in the box art. I was pretty sure they used Plague Bear skin instead, but I'm not super up to date on contrast paint and the names, since I'm mostly using Army Paint or Speed Paint these days. Yeah. So maybe the Citadel color app can help us out there. Usually it has a lot more information about the colors that were used. So I figured I'd check that, and lo and behold, they do have a recipe for Rotswords. And the base color they are suggesting is also got triple flesh. Interesting. It turns out I have neither Plague Bear flesh nor got triple flesh, but here's the deal. And this is already the first huge takeaway from this video. It doesn't really matter what exactly they used, since the secret to most Games Workshop box arts is just a lot of mixing. The AV archive, initiated by Infernal Brush, also known as Dave Perryman, a former heavy metal painter, shows that it's never just one base color, one shade color, and then one highlight color. Often the base color is already a mix of 2 or 3 colors. And it's multiple steps back and forth to get to the result. And I guess that could just be too daunting to beginners. So the recommendations stay simple. But it also means if you set out to paint like the box arts with these recommendations, you'll most likely never get there, as studio results are like imperial propaganda posters, inspirational, aspirational, and hiding about 90% of the messy reality. So instead of relying on videos and apps, I chose to rely on my ability to eyeball from some high-res pictures instead, and mixing paints myself to get as close as possible to the box art results. I've been raving about these minis in a previous video, and when I assembled them, that sentiment was just confirmed again. I really like the aesthetics they went for with these chunky armor plates, parts falling off, and these slightly decaying pauldrons shaping the silhouettes distinctively. Also, they look bulky without relying too much on the trope of every Nurgle unit being bloated and guts spilling from cracked armor, which makes these minis read more like tragic knights than walking biohazards. I also ended up liking the antlers, but I got to admit they were a bit of an acquired taste for me, and I'll definitely tone them down once I get to work on my Blight Knights. The added face options are really cool, really great new direction, and I can see myself using these for some kit bashes. After building some simple bases from cobblestone, first I used some resin bits from Epic Basing that I printed, and then to be more flexible, I also tried carving my own from bits of plaster. All of this just adds a little drama and offers different ways to customize my minis without too much effort. But as easy as it is, it emphasizes the dramatic poses the minis have. And I filled a few gaps with backyard dirt and left some parts blank, but more on why I did that later. Then I base coated everything black and blasted all the armor parts with a solid metallic base color. And I went with a bright metal because it's always easier to darken metallics than to bring back brightness on them. Same logic as Chaos Corruption, it's always easier to fall than to climb back up. Next, I had to find a base color for the armor, and after looking at these close-ups, I figured I would need a brighter green, some yellow-brown, and a darker green. And since I had neither of the Games Workshop recommendations, I started from a mix of Mantis Warrior green with a little Nastreg yellow. And you can see that this results in a nice olive green, and as always I thinned that down with some contrast medium to make the first layer a little less opaque. And when applying the first layer, I'm already trying to guide the pigments towards areas I want them to pool in. So on that row of armor plates, that means pushing them more towards the outside where the rivets are to keep the center brighter. And the idea is to gradually build up the darker areas by building layer after layer. I'm not only building the shading though, I'm also adding color variation. So here the next layer consisted of more Nastreg yellow, which adds this beige brown shade to the green. At this point I'm trying to bring back some shine to areas that would catch more light, like that upper area of the chest and of course the helmet. And I do this using Tainted Gold by Army Painter. I used this paint in a couple of videos already and it's really amazing because it feels like it adapts to whatever the base color is. Now I know that sounds a little esoteric, and I guess the reason why it works in so many contexts is just that it's a very desaturated gold color. But the reason I like it so much is that I can just apply thin layers of it without creating any harsh transitions. You can see that I have very little paint on the brush and I built these thin layers of paint, and as I turn it around you can see more light reflecting from these layers than the more matte parts that were covered in the washes. I just rub the brush over the surface I want brighter and more reflective. This is supposed to be a subtle effect, and even just a little paint makes all the difference. I've been using this effect for over 20 years now, and it's such an effective little trick. And the good thing is you don't need a lot of skill, maybe a little brush control and a bit of dedication where to push your pigments to. But you could even use dry brushing to apply back the sheen and then just apply the next few wash layers with a brush again. But before we descend deeper into plastic addiction, let's talk about the sponsor of this video. Into the AM. You probably know them as the premier graphic tees company on the internet, and rightfully so. I own so many of their shirts at this point, I could wear a different one every day and still not repeat a design. Almost as impressive as my pile of shame. And right now is the perfect time to start your Into the AM journey. The graphic tees packs are heavily discounted, so you can instantly upgrade your wardrobe without sacrificing your Warhammer budget. Into the AM graphic tee packs give you more premium designs bundled together at a price that saves you significantly compared to buying them individually. And when we hear graphic tees, we expect them to look a little immature sometimes, but these shirts are tasteful and stylish. The designs allow you to show personality without saying a word. They enunciate humor, creativity, and individuality. Just a perfect way to express ourselves for nerdy folks like you and me. They are perfect casual everyday wear with that hint of streetwear style. The fit is amazing, the prints last forever, and the material feels so good you sometimes wonder if you're wearing anything at all. I'm a massive fan of the vintage designs and these cool shirts with the small detail on the front and the big motif in the back. Just check out their website and browse the designs. I'm sure you're going to find that one shirt that speaks to you. Or 9. Use my link in the description to start your Into the AM journey today, or to expand your collection of these amazing designs. And all of that at a massive discount with these awesome graphic tee packs. And next I'm switching to Creed Camo, and I focus layers on areas that I want to be dark. Basically, this is my way to build shading, and I deliberately put these into places that are facing down. Also at the end of these armor stripes, since they're curved and should be darker than the middle sections where I already put the main highlight on. Also on the legs, off to one side of the sharp edges in the middle to create some deliberate volumetric light on the armor. So I'm not only creating a matte versus reflective contrast, but also a contrast between light and dark. So I'm killing two birds with one stone. And I also let this wash creep into recesses between armor plates to distinguish the individual elements. Looking at the box art again, there is a bit more brown in the armor. So next I was using Saiga Brown to add this color shift. But at the same time, I could also use it to darken certain areas even more. At that point, I'm starting to be really happy with the shading and also the color of the armor, and it's time to build the edge highlights. And I'm also using this brighter metallic paint to build stronger but more confined highlights in the already reflective parts. Again, notice how very little paint I have on the brush, just running it over the surfaces to leave a little of the pigment. So while this looks a little complicated, just doing it on one mini, doing it on a batch of minis or a whole army makes it a lot quicker. Obviously, since you don't have to wait for layers to dry, and I contemplated doing it on the whole box just to illustrate how quick it is to get to an awesome result like this, once you have the general idea and dilution levels dialed in. But honestly, these guys are just such awesome minis. I want to paint most of them in more dramatic ways and maybe even use them for a Golden Demon entry. So I just painted the one. If I'm painting an army, this is the standard I would try to paint it to. Maybe a few more shortcuts here and there, but overall, this is it. If you're happy with more basic results so you can get your minis on the table, that's perfectly fine. I'm not here to judge or gatekeep. I'm just here to give you ideas and maybe help you push your skills a bit, if that is what you want. This is a painting channel after all. And now let's focus on other elements of the mini. I'm kinda sure the way all these dark metal parts, like the pauldrons and most of the weapons, were painted with just a few layers of rattling grime. And I'm not gonna lie, this is so simple and yet gives such a great effect. Depending on how many layers you apply, you get different levels of the base metal paint to shine through, which makes this suitable for a wide range of minis. One layer and you could just instantly build depth and definition on any regular armored model that wasn't blessed by Papa Nurgle. Apply 2 or 3 layers and you get that perfect blackened metal look, especially if you babysit the paint away from higher areas to retain the metallic shine, like I did here. Or just go all the way and you have a perfect dark base to build a few layers of intense red-brown rust. Another thing that makes this look amazing is throwing on really bright edge highlights. They just frame the dark pauldrons nicely, and of course any chipping or scratching you do on top will have a really high impact. To build the rust, I'm mixing Mournfang Brown with contrast medium, and I'm trying to have it stay in the recesses. But here I do not care at all if we do have a bit of a splotchy finish, because that will make it look more like how rust really behaves on a piece of armor. Of course, rust will be more intense where water accumulates, so I gave the areas around the rivets at least one more pass. And I'm also dabbing on additional spots, mostly in other recesses. I also gave the shield a few streaks of the mix for some additional detail. On areas like the Morning Star as well as the shield, I go back in with the metallics and build more visible scratches, since obviously these pieces of gear will receive more wear. And one last metallic detail I have to treat is the cowbell on the back. Every Nurgle model needs at least one whimsical detail, because eternal rots doesn't mean you can't accessorize. So I'm mixing Fireslayer flesh with snakebite leather, and for that final tone shift that I need, I'm adding Fuegon orange. This took 2 or 3 layers to make an impact, but we're on a good trajectory right away. What brought the effect home though was a last layer of Fireslayer flesh, which brought in that salmon color shade I'm always looking for in copper. And then I begin to build the rest of the base colors for the model. Brown for the leather straps, a dark turquoise for the handle of the weapon and the cloth parts, as well as a mix of screamer pink and this dark turquoise for the dangling cloth piece covering his behind. I also covered the antlers in a bright beige and all the skin in a pink tone I mixed from this beige and very little screamer pink. The easiest part to define was the purple cloth. I just gradually added a little pink horror, and the way Games Workshop usually highlights these is slapping on a layer on the brightest parts of the ridges, like I do here, but ultimately deviating from that a little and highlighting all the areas facing up with this mid-tone will make this look a lot more credible. It's closer to how light actually behaves on cloth, and because of that the results look a lot more pleasing to the eye, at least in my opinion. I did add one more highlight with a bit more pink horror mixed in, and that was that. For the leather, I also just mixed my base brown with the beige I already had on the palette and highlighted all the edges. And then, similar to the butt cloth, I deviated a bit from what the box art was doing by adding a few more lines and highlights to make these areas more interesting to look at. Because, well, now there's just more going on there. And then I just add one last layer of pure beige, basically just more confined lines and dots on the edges. To shade them, I'm dabbing on dots of rattling grime, and that draws everything together nicely, bringing these details to a similar contrast range than the rest of the model. I give all the blackish blue parts highlights with gray, again simply mixing in some of the beige to the base color, and then started working on the antlers. Elements like these that have a gradient are always fun to work with, because in a way it's really satisfying to me building transitions from bright to dark by just gradually adding darker tones. And if you are in a hurry, you can just get away by simply doing this without adding any more highlights, like I did after the shading, but we will get to that. I built the first shade with a mix of beige and a little Nastrag yellow, just to add a bit of depth to the bright base color. It's important that each layer is dry before you move on, otherwise you're going to rip the previous layer and you kinda have to start over, depending on how far you are already in. Next, I'm building the darkest color on the other ends of the antlers, using a dark brown contrast paint, for example Caracas Syra. Try saying that 10 times fast in a row. And as always, using thin layers, you can build gradients by adding more layers to the parts you want darker. And then I'm working over the transitional areas, introducing the more beige brown tones we can see on the reference, mainly using layers of Nastrag yellow. To make the tips a bit darker, I simply added black to the caricature, I just love saying that name, and I added a couple more confined layers. On top of this transition, I added a few lines with beige tones, and by now you have so many brown contrast paint variants on the palette, you can just add little portions of it to the beige to modulate the intensity where needed. For example, you obviously will need a darker beige for the highlights and the darker parts, and you can just use it pure in the brightest parts. At the very base of the antlers, where they meet the helmet, I used ivory for the brightest highlights, and then I dumped a blob of black paint on the areas around the rivets and dark-lined the recesses again that got hit too much by the ivory. And as a last step, I just dabbed on small grey highlights in the blackened ends. I shaded the skin tones with Doomfire Magenta for a bit of a sicklish effect, and also added very diluted Nastrike Yellow too. I know that's not how Games Workshop did it on the box art, but this combination built an interesting tone that fits the Nurgle theme and also my overall scheme. I just had to build up some brighter highlights again with the base color, and finally also a tiny bit of blue added for that shift from warm to cold, which is always a great effect, especially on these sick skin tones. For the base, I wanted to try something a bit more interesting and unique. So I dumped a dark turquoise wash all over, and then while it was still wet, I dabbed on spots of the most toxic looking green I could find. I alternated that with a bright turquoise and then let that mix do whatever it wanted. This created some cool shades of green, making the ground look hostile, like these guys aren't just invading, they have arrived and sanitation has already lost. And after this was more or less dry, I highlighted the stones with a couple of interesting grays I mixed from what I had on the palette. I think in hindsight, dumping a bit more of the toxic bright green would have been good, but this still looks good enough. In any case, I took some UV resin and applied one layer all over the flat areas, using my airbrush to make it creep into all the recesses. After that, I just hit it with my UV torch, which makes the resin cure really quickly. And to make sure everything is perfectly cured, I later also placed it into my curing machine for a 3D print just to be safe. And for a little extra detail, I dabbed on a tiny blob of resin and placed a bit of natural filament to represent some dead vegetation, and then also hardened the connection with the torch. At this point, I'd say we are pretty close to the box art, and we might as well stop here. But of course, the Darkwater box exists, and when looking at the Nurgle Minis in the box, it's clear that they did receive a bit more care than the box art of the Rotswords. So I gave my version a few of these elements that I was spotting here too. Darkening the lower helmet area with a few layers of turquoise and black, and then adding a mix of turquoise and metallics as an edge highlight. I don't know if that was exactly what they did, but to me it looked that way. I also gave the shield a wash of turquoise to add some verdigris, and I also wanted to add a bit more definition to the pauldrons by applying a brighter layer of rust, mostly using scrag brown. Again, mostly in the recesses between the shapes and the rivets, but then also in areas that felt a little empty. For example, that lower area in the front-facing plate, also adding a little more yellow. So yeah, that's my take on pushing these a bit closer to the box art look, while still keeping it flexible enough to adapt to whatever paints you actually have on your desk. Because at the end of the day, it's really about the exact recipe. It's about understanding what the paint is doing and steering it where you want it to go. And this is kind of the big takeaway when it comes to Games Workshop's box arts in general. The paint recipes on the back of these boxes aren't really meant to reproduce the studio results. They're simplified entry points. The actual studio paint jobs rely heavily on mixing, glazing back and forth, subtle color modulation, and lots of small tonal shifts that never show up in these guides. The heavy metal team paints for visual impact under controlled lighting and for photography, while the box instructions are designed to sell you a manageable story about how the model was painted. It's a simplified, product-driven approximation. Something approachable, repeatable, and tied to specific pots, not a documentation of the real workflow. So if your result doesn't look identical, that's not you doing something wrong. It's just two very different goals and workflows. I'm really happy with how this one turned out, and honestly, these minis just invite you to spend extra time on them. I'm pretty sure this won't be the last one you see on this channel. If you agree that grimy Nurgle armor deserves more screen time, then hit the thumbs up button or leave a comment to let the algorithm know. And if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to the channel if you got anything out of the video, because there's always more to come. And thanks for watching, keep pushing that pigment, and see you in the next one.